right. Thank you, Julia. And our next artist will be Maike. Maike Baumgärtner. I welcome you to the stage. Ich kann es auch auf Deutsch machen. Es ist schlimm, wenn man einfach nicht umschalten kann. Ja, Maike wird eine Geschichte vorlesen aus der letzten Ausgabe der Blank, die ihr, vielleicht haben wir es vergessen zu sagen, auch da vorne noch euch kostenlos mitnehmen könnt. Und ja, Maike ist mittlerweile schon, ich weiß gar nicht, seit wie vielen Jahren da. Gerade hast du gesagt, du hast für den Namen von Blank damals noch abgestimmt. Das muss 2007 gewesen sein oder 2008. Ja, reminds me, dass Blank mittlerweile 10 Jahre besteht, was an sich vielleicht schon einen kleinen Applaus wert ist, selbst wenn ihr es erst seit kurzem kennt. Und ja, genug der Selbstbetüdelei. Hier ist Maike und ihre Geschichte.
Also herzlichen Dank für die Einführung. Und das Einzige, was ich euch unbedingt sagen muss, bevor ich meine Kurzgeschichte vortrage, ist, ihr werdet die Füße eurer Familie nie wieder genauso sehen wie bisher. Family matters. For some people, pedicures are the only socially acceptable form of therapy. They walk past the tiny, ridiculous fountain that makes me want to pee all day, plunge down in a comfy seat, and hand over their feet as well as their troubles. I guess it makes sense to feel all too familiar with us pedicurists. Touching somebody's feet has something very intimate to it. Also, we wear white scrubs. The doctor is in. Tell me all about that disgusting rash or what your ex liked in the sack. Entertained and sometimes burdened with all those secrets, we tend to feel all-knowing when it comes to gossip. Of course, this is an illusion, even in a small, out-of-the-way town. As a general rule, my boss Pat always says, we are Switzerland. In a tiny place such as Grand Cache, one negative comment turns into a storm of gossip, and all of a sudden, the fact that you forgot to say good morning to a customer turns into a story about how the salon's basement is used for human trafficking. That's the kind of Chinese whispers we play in an out-of-the-way town that relies only on one big business as an employer. The business here is a family planning products factory owned by Bruce Wood. Not an alias, although his name delights the local teenagers. And soon to be passed on to his daughter Stephanie. Everyone in Grand Cache knows her. She grew up not only as the town's richest daughter, but also the only child of old Bruce Wood. Stephanie preferred pale shades of nail polish, tipped well, and was one of my regulars. Stephanie also preferred her feet to be treated with as much privacy as possible. The reason for this was her unfortunate birth defect, her words, not mine, which refers to the hardly noticeable fact that 2 of her toes are grown together. After her first appointment with me, I Googled the condition, and apparently it's a genetic trait that comes with no health issues. Well, good for her. Even better for me, since I get to pocket a serious tip for my discretion. At least this was the status quo a fortnight ago, because this story is about how her tiny secret came out and the massive impact it made in our small community. Now, 2 weeks later, everyone knows about her toes, stubby as they are. But on that day, she called to cancel her appointment with me. Miss Wood's not coming in today. Betty, you hear me? Pat yelled over the whale song we play on loop in the salon. That's new, I grumbled, because I knew the other customers would leave the minimum tip in my pocket that day. I was surprised because Stephanie usually made a point of keeping all her appointments and being there on the dot as well. Pat tiptoed over to where I was folding towels, trying to look serious. But I could see very well that she had some exciting gossip that she was just about to tell. Well, Miss Wood had a very good reason to cancel today, she said, savoring every moment before the big reveal. Oh? I tried to seem disinterested and was promptly awarded with Pat picking up the speed. There was a death in the family. Who died? I asked, all ears now. If it was a member of the famous Wood clan, I was sure to know the deceased. Bruce Wood is dead. We stood there for a moment, blinking at each other stupidly. The towel I had been folding lay forgotten on the floor. I knew that his death would have consequences for more than just the Wood family. Nearly everyone's employer was gone, meaning that until the funeral was over and Stephanie took the reins, the whole town would hold their breath. As the news spread through Grand Cache, we were alerted several times of Wood's death by every single busybody in town who just wanted to let everyone know so they could pay their respects. The other reason the phone did not stop ringing for the next few days was that most of town indeed wanted to come to the funeral. Somehow, at least the women in this town seemed to feel that a pedicure was in order to look their best at the funeral. After all, it was late August, and if there is any excuse to wear black, high-heeled sandals, the ladies of Grand Cache were not going to let it pass by, be it for a summer wedding or a summer funeral. Also, I strongly suspected, they knew there was no place to gossip like the Paradise Salon. The next morning was booked solid, mostly with packs of women who ignored me while I worked on their feet, and they worked on their conspiracy theories. I know old Wood had a weak heart, but still, I know, he wasn't even that old, and Stephanie really wanted to inherit from him. About time, too. She waited for 40 years to step out of Daddy's shadow. Poor thing, never started a family, always on call if her father needed help at work. I tuned out, listening to my own thoughts while I massaged Miss Abbott's feet with coconut lotion. Next to her, Nancy had already applied cherry red polish to Miss Dean's bony toes. Nancy had the same glazed-over look in her eyes I must have shown. As soon as something happened in Grand Cache, which was next to never, there was no stopping gossip. By the end of the pedicure, Miss Abbott and Miss Dean would have come up with plenty of imaginative scenarios surrounding Bruce Wood's death and his daughter's inheritance. It never occurred to them that Wood had died of natural causes, then passed on his company to Stephanie. End of story. Of course, that alone would not make for good gossip, so I finished the pedicure on autopilot, politely walked out my customer, and went to the back to have my first cup of coffee that day. Thank goodness for caffeine, I thought, when Pat stepped next to me. She looked sheepish, so I decided to let her off the hook. What's wrong? Miss Wood called and asked about an appointment with you. I wanted to fit her in at 4, but the salon will be busy later, and she insisted on the private pedicure she usually has. And I told her she could come in during lunch break. I hope you don't mind. After all, the poor dear has just lost her father. I didn't want to tell her no. Nancy will do my feet during the break, and you will do Miss Wood's. I'll buy us lunch as soon as she leaves. I agreed there was no way to turn down Stephanie. Not just before the funeral, and especially not when Pat was going to buy lunch. You could say what you will about her, but she was not cheap. As soon as Stephanie walked in, I felt bad for being so flippant about her situation. She looked reserved and so frail that I was worried she might not make it to the chair. I settled her in, got her a glass of water, and went to work. She leaned back with her eyes closed, so I let her be while I put her feet into the foot bath. Next to us, Pat and Nancy came in. With a worried look at Stephanie, Pat sat down quietly and quickly put her feet into the water to soak. Nancy did her best to be quiet about her preparations, but none of us really thought Stephanie could catch a wink of sleep here. After a while, I decided to end the uncomfortable silence. I picked up a towel and said, Miss Wood, if you're ready... Oh, of course... She lost her trail of thought. I followed her gaze to Nancy's hands, wondering what had caught Stephanie's attention. She was in the process of rubbing Pat's feet with lotion, and I briefly suspected that Stephanie was offended by the flowery scent. Then I saw it. Pat's third and fourth toes were firmly grown together, even more noticeable than with Stephanie's toes. Then I noticed Pat's gaze on Stephanie's feet. At this moment, I did not think of the consequences for either woman. I was simply amused about the two, sitting next to each other, staring at each other's feet. "Is this a common trait in your family?" asked Stephanie, growing paler by the second. "I'm the only one," Pat sat frozen in her seat, dumbstruck. Stephanie stared for a moment longer, then looked up to Pat's face. It only occurred to me then that their similarities in looks were not only due to their closeness in age. Both had a determined chin, dark brown eyes, and were tougher than you would give any short person credit for. "I got it from my father," Stephanie revealed, with a dead voice. They grew quiet once again. Then Stephanie remembered an urgent appointment. Very likely, I thought. She is probably lawyering up, while Nancy, completely unaware of the impact of this lunch break, selected a plum color for Pat's toenails. I left her to her thoughts and went about my business. As I cleaned my instruments, put the towels in the wash, and worked on 3 increasingly ugly pairs of feet, the day slowly went by. All the while, I kept sneaking peeks at Pat. She kept working, trooper that she was, but it was no surprise to me that she was distracted that afternoon. The next day, she came back looking determined, so I dragged her to the back. "I talked to my mother," she announced. Apparently, Bruce was the love of her life. Her voice dripped sarcasm as she said it. They were both already married back then and decided not to cause a scandal by dissolving their marriages. It took me a moment, then I gasped. "He knew about you." "That's right. Lovely family, isn't it?" She grew angrier by the second. "What are you going to do now?" "Obviously, Bruce owes me big time. I called my lawyer about my legal part of the inheritance. I'm supposed to show up for the reading of his will, and after that it will be determined how much I am legally owed." "It's a big business. You might inherit a lot," I said, trying to remind her of the bright side. When the day of the funeral came, I swung by Pat's house to give her a ride. I had convinced her the day before that she was too stressed out to get behind the wheel. Pat still looked angry when she got into the passenger seat. I tried to give her one of those awkward seat-belted hugs, but she only patted my arm absently. Quiet it is then, I thought, and drove towards the local graveyard. When we pulled up, we were met with lots of curious glances. It seemed that local gossip had run its due course. Well, I sighed inwardly. At least there were no explanations necessary when Pat elbowed through the crowd to end up uncomfortably next to Stephanie. I followed her for a while, but preferred to stay back discreetly, but within earshot. The sisters nodded at each other awkwardly, and through the sea of black, I could just about spot the pastor. Thank goodness there was no time left for uncomfortable conversation. The pastor opened his Bible with a meaningful look. Paul said in Romans chapter 5, verse 12, that through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men. I noticed that the crowd's attention was neither on the pastor nor on the coffin. Everyone kept stealing glances at Stephanie and Pat. Fine, so did I, but at least I tried to do it discreetly. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. The pastor ended his prayer, and the crowd absently murmured their amens. He moved on to praise Bruce Wood's character, and the atmosphere became tense. Member of our community. Involved in charity work. Get to the good stuff, I thought. Although he cared deeply for his business and his community, first and foremost, he was a family man. Ha! Pat cried out. It seemed that no one had let the pastor in on the latest developments. Stephanie stared at her venomously, and every bit of attention the pastor had held went to nil. He cleared his throat and went on. After his wife's death, he devoted all his time to his only daughter. I could see Pat's shoulders shaking. She looked tense, and I could see that she held on to the last bit of countenance. Bruce, who was an honest and decent... That was it. I could follow the exact moment in which Pat's limit was met. every mourner present leaned forwards to make sure they did not miss a thing. Poor Pat, I thought, how hard it must be to bury a father she had never really known. Until I noticed she was not crying. Her shoulders shook until she could no longer hold back her laughter. Deep burst out of her like a drunken sailor. She laughed so hard that she bent over, hands on knees. Stephanie focused her tear-streaked eyes on her. How dare you? First you come here, and now... But there was no stopping Pat's guffaws. Probably to avoid providing more entertainment for the fascinated crowd, she pushed past them along the reefs to get back to the car. She stumbled, nearly fell into the piles of wreaths, but was caught by the casket bearers, whose shocked faces clearly indicated that they were no locals. She nearly lost one of her pumps and pulled until it came free. Unfortunately, she had not only freed her shoe, but also the wreath's banner. So she left the cemetery, chin up, still giggling hysterically, dragging a banner behind her that said, "My dear father." The days that followed were joyfully filled with town gossip. Though at least when it came to the company, Pat made it very clear that she did not make claims on it. Rather, she and her lawyer had worked on a plan for a financial settlement. On a personal level, things were much more uncomfortable for Pat. Patricia Miller and Peggy Hooper told Nancy that they would not come in again. They act all offended, as if I had laughed at their dear daddy's funerals. And if what my neighbors tell me is true, Stephanie tells everyone there should be no money for me at all, being illegitimate. She put an emphasis on the last word, trying to gloss over her hurt. And then I run into Stephanie as I'm coming out of my lawyer's office, and she starts yelling at me. I hope this is all the therapy she's going to need, because she really made it count. I can tell you, if I felt bad for disrupting her life, I do not any longer. Tomorrow's the reading of the will, and soon after, everything will be sorted. Do you want me to come, as moral support? I asked, hopefully. That would be great, thanks, hun. I could use someone in my corner. So we went, bright and early the next day, and right in front of the office, we bumped into Stephanie. Good timing, I thought, was nothing we could be accused of. Stephanie glared at us. So you're here? Yep. By now, Pat was remarkably blasé about the whole affair. Well, I hope this time you will keep your temperament in check. Her voice rose dangerously. I swear, if you cause another scene... Don't worry, sis, Pat said, and Stephanie cringed. This time I will honor the family tradition of keeping my mouth shut. We stepped through the door and, to my amazement, were greeted not only by the lawyer, but also by a young man in shorts and sandals. Who are you? Stephanie demanded gruffly. May I introduce myself? I'm Bruce's son, George, also known as the sole beneficiary. Impossible! Stephanie yelled. Pat simply stood and stared. Is it? The young man said, put his sandaled feet on the desk, and wriggled his toes. Thank you.